All right, so welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
This time around, we are going to be taking a look at Pastor Ben's Worshipper's Manna.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things that really stood out to me was this idea of praise
Yeah.
being a weapon.
Yeah.
And not just like
Right.
in the sense of, like a worship song being a weapon,
Sure.
but like praise in our everyday life.
Right.
As being this
force.
Yeah, this force for good.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Overcoming the challenges of life and
yeah, it's like he's taking this thing that, for a lot of people is kind of relegated to Sunday morning, singing in church or whatever.
Right.
And he's saying, no, this is
an everyday thing.
This is like it's an active thing.
Yeah. It's a practice.
Yeah, it's a practice.
It's a discipline.
Yeah, and it's connected to this idea of like resilience, which I think resonates with people, even if they're not particularly religious.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be able to bounce back from stuff,
Right.
And he's saying like praise is a key ingredient in that.
And the example that Pastor Ben uses in in the book is David.
Right, King David.
King David, right? So
I mean, that guy was like
yeah, he had a lot of
nonstop drama.
He had a lot of enemies.
Yeah.
He's got Saul who's,
jealous,
chasing him down, trying to kill him.
Stake him out, yeah.
He's got the Philistines, coming after him, and then later on you've got Absalom,
Yeah, his own son.
His own son rebels against him.
Yeah.
So this guy was constantly in like survival mode.
Right, right.
But Pastor Ben is saying that like throughout all of this, David's secret weapon was praise.
Yeah.
It was this ability to,
focus on God.
Yeah, focus on God even in the midst of all this.
In the midst of all this craziness.
Turmoil.
And I think what's powerful about that is even though it's like an ancient story,
right,
it's so relatable because we all have our own Goliaths, We
all have our own. Yeah, absolutely.
It might not be an actual giant with a sword.
Right.
But it might be, a health diagnosis or, like you said, a job loss or a relationship problem.
Right. Financial problems all the time.
Exactly. And he's saying that same principle applies.
Absolutely.
That cultivating that inner state of praise can help us face our own giants.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and it made me think about like, because we all have those things in our life.
Right.
And one of the things that he talks about is this idea of like prophetic praise. And so like when I think of like prophetic praise,
right,
I immediately go to like, charismatic churches and people are like,
yeah, like speaking in tongues.
Yeah, like, speaking in tongues and like,
calling down fire from heaven.
Falling down fire from heaven and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's more nuanced than that.
Yeah, he's talking about something a little deeper, I think.
It's like this active declaration of God's goodness and power, even when things are tough.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's like, when you're going through a really difficult time.
Yeah.
And you are praising God.
Right.
It's almost like you're speaking.
You're speaking your desired outcome into existence.
Yeah.
You're aligning yourself with this idea of a divine plan.
Right.
Which I think is fascinating because that can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Sure.
Some people might see it as, surrendering to fate.
Right.
Others might see it as this active co-creation with a higher power.
Yeah.
Like you're partnering with God to bring about something good.
Yeah, it's a really powerful concept. And for me personally, like the idea that there is a plan, even if I can't see it.
Right.
Gives me a sense of hope.
Absolutely.
When things are really chaotic and crazy.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, God's got this.
Yeah, he's got a bigger picture in mind.
Even if I can't see it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I could see how, like, for some people that might feel
like a little too passive.
Like a little too passive.
Yeah, like I want to be in control.
Yeah.
I want to make my own destiny.
Yeah.
And that's fine too.
Yeah.
But I think Pastor Ben is offering an alternative perspective here.
Absolutely. And and kind of along those lines.
Yeah.
He also talks about how sometimes our praise can sound a lot like complaining.
Right.
And he asks us to really examine like
the quality of our sound.
Yeah, the quality of our sound.
Like what are we actually putting out there?
Or like what's coming out of our mouths.
Yeah.
Is it genuine praise?
Yeah.
Or is it just kind of disguised?
Like grumbling.
Yeah. Disguised complaining.
And I think that goes back to that idea of resilience too.
Yeah.
Because if praise is supposed to be this empowering force, right?
Then focusing on the negative is probably doing the opposite.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah, it's like depleting your energy.
It's depleting your energy rather than...
Sort of fueling it.
Fueling it, right. And it's, it's funny because I think a lot of times we don't even realize we're doing it.
We're so used to focusing on the negative.
Yeah, we're just so used to, like, complaining about things and...
Right, and venting and all that stuff.
And it's become so normalized.
Totally. It's like the air we breathe.
Yeah, and it's like, he's not saying, like, don't acknowledge the negative, but it's like,
what is your focus?
Where's your focus? Are you dwelling on the problem?
Right.
Or are you actively looking for the good for God's presence in the midst of it?
Yeah, for the solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he uses some pretty wild...
Oh, yeah, he brings up some pretty wild stories.
Yeah, from the Bible.
From the Bible, like
Jehoshaphat. Who defeats these 3 armies.
3 armies.
By sending out, like, a worship team, basically.
Right.
It's incredible.
It's crazy, right? Like, how does that even work?
Yeah, and then there's the fall of Jericho.
The fall of Jericho.
Where they're marching around this city.
Yeah.
Blowing trumpets.
And shouting.
And praising God.
Yeah.
And the walls come tumbling down.
It's wild, right? And so it's like, those stories are...
They're kind of mind-blowing.
They're hard to wrap your mind around.
Yeah.
If you're coming at it from like a
purely rational perspective.
Yeah, a purely rational perspective.
Yeah.
But I wonder, like, do you think there's a modern equivalent to that kind of, like...
That collective power of praise?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
You think so?
I mean, I think we see it all the time, even outside of religious contexts.
Right.
Like, think about social movements that achieve the seemingly impossible, or even sports teams that rally for a win against all odds.
Yeah.
It's that shared belief.
Yeah.
That collective energy that can create amazing results.
Absolutely.
And I think Pastor Ben is suggesting that praise can tap into that same kind of power.
Okay, now this is where it gets, like, really interesting.
Yeah.
So Pastor Ben says that Satan hates genuine praise.
To Christ.
To Christ.
Yeah.
Like, he hates it.
He can't stand it.
And it's interesting because, when I read that, I was like, wait, like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, what does that even mean?
Like, why
would the devil care if I'm singing, Amazing Grace in my car?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But I think from a theological perspective, it speaks to this idea of spiritual warfare. You know, this idea that there are these unseen forces at work in the world.
Right.
And that our praise is somehow disrupting those forces.
Okay, so it's almost like...
Yeah.
Like a weapon.
It's like a weapon.
Against evil.
Yeah, and for someone who believes in those concepts, it reinforces the idea that genuine praise is a potent force.
Yeah.
It's almost like saying that even expressing joy in the face of adversity may be seen as an act of defiance against the forces of darkness.
So it's like we're not just singing a nice song.
It's not just about feeling good. It's about tapping into a deeper power.
Yeah. It's like this spiritual warfare.
Spiritual warfare. And it's interesting because, even if you don't necessarily subscribe to that whole, like, demons and devils kind of thing, I think there's still something powerful about the idea that our internal state can affect our external reality. And that praise can be a way to shift that internal state.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Pastor Ben basically leaves us with this
big question,
this huge question, which is if we view our own battles,
our own struggle, our own challenges through this lens of praise, how
would we approach them differently? What would our own sound, our own way of facing those challenges be like?
That's a great question.
It is.
I think that's something that we can all ponder and think about.
Chew on that for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we can all start implementing some of these principles in our lives.
Right.
And see what happens.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this deep dive.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll catch you next time.